wasn't her handler or her boyfriend. He was her brother. Senior Chief Marcus Hale, decorated, respected, the kind of man whose word carried weight in rooms she'd never be invited into. He had found out what she was doing 2 months in and had tried to stop her. They had fought, loud, bitter, the kind of fight only siblings can survive. But when he realized she wouldn't quit, he made a choice. If she insisted on walking into fire, he would stand close enough to pull her out. "You're playing a dangerous game," he told her now. She met his gaze without flinching. "So are you." The second twist came a week later when one of the men from that night filed a complaint. Not about harassment, but about assault. He claimed Marcus had attacked him without cause. The story spread fast, twisted by rumor into something unrecognizable. Suddenly, she wasn't a quiet woman enduring insults. She was a manipulator who lured men into traps. "Cheap Stulted sets up local heroes," one headline sneered on a fringe blog. The town divided. Some said she deserved whatever she got for acting like that. Others began to wonder why so many women had quietly left Port Mason over the years. Marcus was placed on temporary suspension pending review. That was the breaking point. Instead of retreating, she released the recordings. Every sneer, every slur, every $5 taunt. The footage didn't show a transaction. It showed a test, a deliberate attempt to degrade someone they assumed powerless. It showed Marcus stepping in only after escalation. And America watched. The video went viral overnight. Talk shows debated it. Comment sections exploded. Veterans weighed in, many defending Marcus, others condemning harassment culture near bases. But the most powerful response came from women. Hundreds, then thousands, sharing their own stories under a single phrase: "We are not for sale." The town council called an emergency meeting. The Naval Command launched an internal investigation, not into Marcus, but into the environment that had allowed such behavior to fester. And the men who had laughed that night found themselves facing consequences far heavier than embarrassment. One lost his civilian contracting job. Another was required to attend mandatory conduct hearings that would shadow his career for years. The third issued a public apology that trembled more from fear than remorse. But the final twist was the most unexpected. When the dust settled, when the headlines moved on, when Marcus was reinstated with a quiet commendation for measured restraint under provocation, she didn't leave town. She rented a small office 2 blocks from the Rusty Anchor and opened a legal advocacy center for harassment victims, funded by donations that had poured in after the story broke. On opening day, the same neon sign flickered overhead across the street, but something had shifted. Men walked past her door more carefully. Women walked in with heads slightly higher. And the $5 bill? She framed it, not as a symbol of shame, but as proof of how cheaply some people try to buy power and how expensive it becomes when they're wrong. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the harbor, Marcus stood beside her outside the office. "You know they still talk," he said. She smiled faintly. "Let them." He studied her for a long moment. "You proved something." She shook her head gently. "No, they did. In the end, the story wasn't about $5. It wasn't about a slur hurled in drunken arrogance. It was about assumptions, how quickly they're made, how confidently they're defended, and how spectacularly they collapse when confronted by truth. They thought they had paid her to degrade herself. Instead, they paid for exposure. They paid for change. And the Navy SEAL they underestimated proved not just that she wasn't what they called her, but that strength doesn't always shout back. Sometimes it waits, records, and lets justice speak loud enough for the whole country to hear. Before we begin, listen closely, because this story will shake you, anger you, and maybe even change how you see the person standing quietly at the edge of the room. And if you believe in second chances, hidden strength, and justice that hits like a thunderclap, then subscribe right now, because stories like this don't just entertain America, they remind us who we really are. The night they called her Cheap Tea started like any other humid Friday along the cracked sidewalks of Port Mason, a fading coastal town where sailors came to drink and locals came to judge. She stood beneath the flickering neon of the Rusty Anchor, wearing a thin jacket that did little against the damp wind, her hair tied back, her face bare of makeup except for the bruised yellow exhaustion under her eyes. And when the group of young men spilled out of the bar, already laughing too loud at their own jokes, they spotted her the way bored men spot an easy target. "Hey," one of them slurred, waving a $5 bill between his fingers like bait. "That enough for you?" Another chimed in, louder, uglier. "Cheap, sell tea." The word cut through the air sharp as broken glass, and people on the sidewalk heard it. Some slowed, some pretended not to, because humiliation is easier to witness when you convince yourself it's none of your business. She didn't flinch. That was what unsettled them most. She simply looked at the bill, then at the one holding it, and after a long, unreadable pause, she stepped forward and took it. The men erupted in laughter, thinking they'd won something, thinking they'd bought proof of their own assumptions for less than the cost of a beer. "See? Told you," one said, already pulling out his phone as if to record a trophy moment. What they didn't see was the subtle shift in her posture, the way her shoulders squared, the way her eyes sharpened from dull gray to something almost metallic. She turned and walked down the alley beside the bar, not rushing, not looking back. And the boldest of the men followed, still laughing, still filming, expecting degradation, expecting compliance, expecting the kind of story they could retell for years about the night they bought a woman for $5. But halfway down that alley, the laughter stopped. A tall figure stepped from the shadows, broad-shouldered, calm, wearing a simple navy jacket and jeans that did nothing to hide the coiled readiness in his stance. His voice was quiet, but it carried like a command across a battlefield. "That's far enough," the man with the phone scoffed. "What, you her boyfriend?" The stranger didn't answer the question. Instead, he looked at the woman, and for a fraction of a second, something passed between them. Recognition, calculation, confirmation. She handed him the $5 bill. "They paid," she said evenly. The stranger nodded once, then turned back to the group. "You boys just bought yourselves a lesson." It happened so fast, none of them would later be able to explain it properly. One moment they were puffed up with drunken bravado, and the next, the man with the phone found his wrist twisted behind his back, the device clattering to the pavement. Another lunged forward and ended up face down against brick, breath knocked from his lungs. The tall stranger moved with precision, not rage, controlled, efficient, terrifyingly practiced. Within seconds, all three were pinned or stumbling backward, the laughter replaced by curses and confusion. "You can't just attack us," one shouted, scrambling to his feet. "We didn't do anything." The stranger's eyes were ice. "You publicly harassed a woman, attempted to coerce her, and filmed it without consent. In some places, that's more than enough." "Who the hell are you?" another demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. The answer came not from him, but from her. "He's a Navy SEAL," she said calmly. And that's when fear truly bloomed. Because even in a small town like Port Mason, everyone knew what that meant. Discipline forged in brutal training, missions no one could talk about, a level of mental and physical endurance that turned ordinary men into legends whispered about in bars just like the Rusty Anchor. The stranger didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. He simply stepped closer. "You think $5 gives you power?" he asked quietly. "It doesn't buy dignity. It doesn't buy consent. And it sure as hell doesn't buy the right to label someone." The bravado drained from their faces. "We were just joking," one muttered. The woman finally spoke again, her voice no longer distant, but sharp. "You weren't joking. You were testing whether I'd break." Silence swallowed the alley. The men exchanged glances, calculating whether pride was worth pushing further. It wasn't. They backed away, muttering threats they didn't mean, retreating toward the safety of neon light and noise. The SEAL watched until they were gone, then turned to her. "You didn't have to take it," he said quietly. She folded the $5 bill once, then again. "Yes, I did." And that was when the first twist unraveled. She wasn't what they thought. She wasn't waiting for a transaction. She wasn't desperate. She was documenting. Tucked inside her jacket was a small audio recorder. In her pocket, a second phone streamed everything live to a private server. For 6 months, she had been gathering evidence of harassment, assault, and coercion around the naval base nearby. Stories dismissed, complaints buried, women labeled and shamed into silence. She had let them believe what they wanted to believe, because predators reveal themselves when they think they're safe. 3 more, she said softly. That makes 12. The SEAL exhaled, tension easing slightly. Command won't like this. Command doesn't know yet, she replied. He studied her face, the steady fire in her eyes. When this breaks, it's going to explode. She nodded. It's supposed to. What no one in Port Mason knew, not the bartenders, not the sailors, not even the gossiping neighbors, was that she was a former investigative journalist who had walked away after her editor killed a story about misconduct near military installations because advertisers didn't want controversy. She had come here under a different name, blending into the margins where assumptions thrive. And the Navy SEAL? He wasn't her handler or her boyfriend. He was